Welcome to New Hampshire Politics with John Burt. I'm John Burt. Well, thank you for joining me today. And today we have former Representative Max Abramson to visit with us. And Max, it's a pleasure to have you on. You've been on once before.
Once before?
Yeah, I got a lot of good reviews when you were on.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of people said they liked the show.
Well, maybe that's because I tell a lot of jokes. When I start talking, I go off on a little bit of a tangent and I start telling jokes and stories.
Yeah. Well, you and Gary Hopper, Representative Hopper.
He does.
You guys get very passionate sometimes with your speeches, and I think people like that. So we'll start right in, and what I wanted you on today for was you got a lot of good topics that you want to talk about, and I'd love to cover them. And one is, Jesse's Law. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I ran for state house as a Republican, and then I changed to Libertarian, and then I finally decided to run for governor as a Libertarian in order to talk about drug policy and talk about harm reduction. So one of the bills that I came up with, I'm a big believer in going back to taking care of problems at the local level like we used to, back before the Great Society, the war on drugs, the war on crime, the war on poverty.
Which is all failing.
Yeah, so it's all big government. In fact, the war on drugs, literally, if you look at it, is almost exactly the same as the old Soviet style, build prisons, more arrests, more SWAT raids, and it doesn't work. So Jesse's Law was aimed at getting back to enabling local solutions, enabling counties, towns, fire departments, schools to have a lot more leeway in prevention, treatment, and recovery support. Unfortunately, it only got 43 votes. And ironically, it was Republicans who said, or a Republican who said that they wanted to just keep on going with a state-run approach. Literally, usually, if somebody's pushing Soviet-style urban planning or Chinese communist curriculum, it's usually Democrats. But in this particular case, I'm big for smaller government. I definitely don't believe in socialism, and yet it was a Republican who wants to keep doing the state-run, top-down approach.
Yeah, no, that's not good because it's not the way we need to be.
Right.
We need to bring it back more local, like you said.
And if you had 10 different solutions for 10 different counties, each county is trying a different approach. Counties can move a lot more quickly than the state can. The state runs on a big, long, slow 2-year cycle with very little feedback.
Yes.
If you're doing things at the county level, more people can go to the county seat and testify. It's the same state reps and county commissioners. Nevertheless, now you're working at the county level. People can come in for the meetings, police, firefighters, addiction experts, and so forth. And you can start making changes every 2 to 3 months if you want, till you can find the best immunity programs and the best treatment and recovery support programs.
Yeah. Well, it's like Granite Hammer just passed the committee a couple days ago, and that's where the police get overtime to try to to arrest heroin users. And what they're doing is they're swooping up just nothing but a lot of small-time marijuana smokers.
Right, 80%. Last time they said it was 80% were just pot smokers or possession of small amounts of cannabis.
Well, one was a lady that stole down in Home Depot right here on South Willow, and they put that under the Granite Hammer.
But at least that's an actual crime. Usually pot smokers, usually aren't hurting anybody else.
Yeah.
I'd rather they not get into cannabis, because they might if you get into marijuana, there's a potential of getting into the wrong culture, but that's not a criminal act in my opinion, because it's not a crime against someone else.
Yes, I agree. Now there is the clinics in Switzerland, if I can say it right, diamorphine, and you want to.
It's like
what does that do?
It's like a nicotine patch, except that it's not a patch. It's an actual clinic. It's almost like a pharmacy that you go into. Back in 1994, Switzerland was struggling with the same heroin crisis, and so they had addicts who'd been through treatment 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and they find some addicts are just not responsive to conventional treatment. So they didn't want these people to die in the street or become dangerous criminals.
Yeah.
So they came up with an approach where they let, under an addiction specialist's supervision, they would come in 1 to 3 times a day, and they wouldn't get enough of a dose of diamorphine to get high, but it was enough to replace street heroin. So codeine, morphine, heroin, diamorphine are all produced from opiates or opium.
Yes.
So they're natural, but diamorphine comes in a small plastic bottle. It's a clear liquid. And they give them really small doses, 5, 10, 15 milligrams, sometimes 25 milligrams. So that's a lot less than I would think it's 200 plus milligrams for a heroin addict to get high off of. So it's literally like the nicotine patch. What they were expecting the crime rates to go down, which they did, and they did save a lot of lives, but what they weren't expecting was, right off the bat, 22% of people who stayed with the program quit. So there was a national referendum on whether or not to get rid of diamorphine clinics, and 68% of Swiss voters voted to keep them. Now what's happened in the subsequent 20 years is 90% of these so-called chronic incurable addicts, 90% have quit heroin.
Really?
Which is amazing, and they've gotten their lives turned around because they can maintain a job, a regular lifestyle, an apartment. They've turned their lives around, and it's saved thousands and thousands of lives. So now Belgium, Holland, Germany, Ireland, Britain, and even Canada are in trials, and some of these countries are now opening up diamorphine clinics because it saves people's lives.
Well, why don't we look at it?
Because I put it in front of one of the Finance Committee divisions as an amendment with the support of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
Yep.
And this one Democrat took it, she saw it, and she just turned it down. She's not even going to look at it because it's controversial. It works. I don't care if it's controversial or not. We're losing 10 people a week right now.
Yeah. Because, I mean, we already do that. The state does it. You know, I can't remember what drug they give to, you know.
It's if it's a synthetic, it's OxyContin or Suboxone or something. It's not the same thing. It has to be something in
but
that
I mean,
line
we're
of-
already doing it. That's what I'm thinking. You know, so let's replace that with this diamorphine
clinics. So if you leave a heroin addict out on the street, it costs $45,000 a year, emergency room visits and arrests and everything, prosecution and whatnot. Diamorphine's $27,000 a year. However, there's a way to do it through local pharmacies where the addict, if they go in and they buy, 5 or 10 milligram needles, they pay for it themselves, and it costs the taxpayers nothing. You just have to make a very small change to the laws, and it all happens. They take care of it themselves. The doctors take care of it themselves.
Yeah. No, we need to look more into that. And then you also talk about ibogaine.
Ibogaine is also a hallucinogenic. Again, controversial. Nevertheless, it's legal in most of the world, and ibogaine clinics are used for really tough cases where people have been through treatment multiple times and nothing is working. And it turns out it's powerful enough, the impact on the brain of an addict, it's powerful enough that it resets addiction. People take ibogaine one time and they come out and they feel no addictive habit-forming behaviors. They feel no impulse to go out and get cocaine or heroin. It's a complete brain reset. We don't know how it works. Maybe it supplies people with a large dose of some type of inhibitor, but if you have a chronic incurable heroin addict and you just let them go back out on the street, they're eventually going to die. So ibogaine has saved a lot of lives in Europe.
Now, are there any states in this country that are doing that now?
No, the federal government bans ibogaine. Anything that works, the federal government has banned it.
So they just want to keep going down this path that's not working.
Well, how else do you maximize drug use? You want to maximize civil forfeiture and build more prisons. The only way to do that is to maximize the problem.
Yeah. Well, that's why I voted against the women's prison. I think you did too.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, because if they build it, they're going to fill it.
Right. They'll fill it. They'll prosecute more people, more women for more and more trivial quote-unquote crimes, victimless crimes, and firearms possession. You walk into a post office and you forget that you've got your firearm on your hip, and now that's what a lot of gun owners groups call, whoops, there's a felony.
Yes.
Make a mistake on a credit card application.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the biggest problem. And now you talk a little bit about Teen Challenge too. What would that do here?
Teen Challenge is already in effect. It's a faith-based program, it's totally voluntarily supported. It's one of the reasons I talk about getting things down to the local level, back to the private sector, doing things privately through local churches and local charities. Excuse me. What we found is Teen Challenge, remember when Representative Warren Groen talked about Teen Challenge, he said it had like a 60% success rate.
Oh, yes.
This last year, 2016, they looked at its success rate, it's about 70% successful. So the drug courts are only working about 4% of the time. Teen Challenge costs taxpayers nothing, it's totally voluntarily supported. They ask for donations, of course, from the families. Has a 70% success rate. So 70% of the people who go in are coming off of heroin, and the reason is they do more of the kind of Vermont-style recovery support. Vermont puts more of their resources into recovery support because they find they get more bang for the buck.
Yes.
Teen Challenge isn't just a quick treatment program. It's something like 15 or 18 months of follow-up of meetings, and that's what makes it work.
Huh. Yeah, well, that's the biggest reason I voted against, Granite Hammery the other day, is because, we can't arrest ourselves out of this.
Well, and we already know every time they step up the war on drugs, crime gets worse. Drug use over the course of the war on drugs has gone from fewer than 20 million users in the 1960s to over 60 million users. It's more than tripled.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge number. Well, one thing, Max, that they did not like, I wish you were there. The eyes went up when I said, "What is this?" Because it's Granite Hammer's now going to be $2.5 million. I think it's going to be almost $3 million over the 2 years.
Think of how many people we could treat,
Oh.
how many people we could do recovery support.
Well, that's what Representative Amanda Bolden said. She said, she figured it out, and I can't remember how many thousands of people we could, give treatment to with this same money. But what we're going to do is arrest people. And I asked the question, that's when their eyes went up, what is this doing to our retirement system, which is really bankrupt? And they were like, they didn't want to talk about it. They were
Police are in Group 2,
Yes.
got a $5 billion unfunded pension liability.
$5 billion.
And then corrections are in Group 1, so they get the Group 1 pension plus Social Security. Now they're trying to take corrections and put them into Group 2, so it would increase the pension liability even more.
Yeah, it's huge.
And they want to keep building more and more prisons. The cost of prisons, public schools, healthcare costs, and college costs all of those are doubling about every 9 or 10 years. They could bankrupt the country.
Yes, yeah. Well, I didn't realize, who was telling me, another representative that sits on finance, he told me, don't quote me on the number, I think it was 10 or 20 years ago, we had 210,000 students or 205,000 students in New Hampshire. Today we have 161,000.
But we still have, what was the number, 46,000 people working in the public school system? So it's a 4-to-1 ratio?
Yeah.
Not even that, 3.5-to-1 ratio?
Yeah. Why?
That's why the public schools cost over $18,000 per year per student.
Yeah.
Not that the children are getting $18,000 worth, but if a starting teacher makes $33,000, why don't we have a class size of 2-to-1? Why aren't there 2 students per classroom if we want smaller classrooms? For $18,000 a year per student? And then the kids end up in prison because the system fails them, and they come from broken families and broken homes, and the prisons are $35,513 a year per student, per inmate, sorry. And then the welfare system, they leave their family behind, and the welfare system costs $61,320 per year per household on welfare.
Wow.
And they basically live on about $900 a month worth of cash and benefits.
Yeah, so it's not doing anybody any good.
No, they're just more and more people, tens of millions of Americans are now institutionalized.
Yeah, and it's sad, because we aren't giving them a hand up. We're keeping them down. And that's what I've always been against on that part, with the welfare system. I want it there to help the truly needy, because I think we shouldn't help the truly needy, but
I believe that the social safety net should be primarily organized down at the local level.
I do too.
Local churches, local charities, local job training programs, and things like that.
Yeah, it used to be. I remember in Vermont when I grew up that we had an overseer of the poor. If you couldn't, you wanted food or something like that, or help with your fuel, you went and saw him, and they knew who was available and who wasn't. Yeah. Now you talked a little bit about Portugal decriminalization of drugs. There's other countries that are doing it too, but what's going on down in Portugal?
Portugal finally, the U.S. and British officials have put pressure on Portugal and other European countries to keep the war on drugs going there, and they're seeing that it doesn't work here. It didn't work in Europe. It didn't work in the Soviet Union. So Portugal in 2001, other countries were decriminalizing some softer drugs. Portugal went full on, decriminalized everything.
Wow, really?
And they went from 90% enforcement, 10% treatment to going completely the other way around. Now it's 90% treatment, prevention, and recovery support, and only 10% goes into enforcement. So what they've done is they did decriminalization to free up resources. And they've cut heroin use by half almost immediately. It took about 10 years, but they cut heroin addiction rates by half. They've dramatically reduced drug use, drug addiction, drug-related crime, new HIV cases, hepatitis cases. They've drastically cut the death rates, and they now have a 98% lower death rate from heroin use than New Hampshire does.
Wow.
So just going from using the prison industry to treat the problem to treating addicts like gambling addicts, alcohol addicts.
Yeah.
Even, when people have an eating addiction or spending addiction, we actually have a support network there, usually at the local level, to help people out, get people back into society. Portugal did something. They also do recovery support, but they did something unusual compared to the other European countries, which is they offer something called employment support. They saw that when people come out of drug treatment, they can't get employment because they've been convicted.
Yep.
They need to get a job.
Yep.
And we found that to make treatment stick, people need to get into a completely different network of people, different set of routines, and they need to be working. So Portugal pays employers a few $1,000s to take each person out of treatment, and actually saves the money because their success rate is now so high. Their recidivism rate has gone down. They don't have to pay for treatment again. And actually, that's one of the things that's helped bring drug addiction rates down in Portugal.
Wow. Yeah. Boy, that'd be a hard sell here because there's such an industry built with the prisons and the courts and everything else, because that would be basically, reduced, by 75% probably.
And that's exactly why I think we need the Libertarian Party. We need people who, what does our counterparts say in Britain? They say they bring a heart to a conservative majority and they bring a brain to a Labour majority. So they're a minor party, they're small, but they've gotten 57 MPs elected in the British Parliament, and they offer something. They're intelligent, they care about people, but they don't spend the economy into a recession the way the Democrats do. But in this country, we have, I think the national GOP is also a big government party, so it's kind of hard to bring the British parallel here into the American system. But I think that there's a need for a third party. There's a need for a political party that solves problems without, blowing through billions of tax dollars. And I think the LP fits that mold very well.
Yes. Yeah. I think it would. Yeah. I mean, because we like you say, Dan McGuire, a former state rep, real good guy, he came to the committee during Granite Hammer, and he said that in 1980 there was less than 500 prisoners in the state prison here in New Hampshire.
200.
Oh, it was less than that.
And in 1970 there were only about 100. When there were 200, people were saying that was too many.
Well, and now there's 22 to 2,400.
If you count all inmates, it's 3,800, but with the new women's prison, it'll be another 169, so almost 4,000.
Wow. And what do we get for that? He said there's no difference in crime, there's no difference in people using drugs.
It actually makes crime worse to take nonviolent offenders and people convicted of victimless crimes and introduce them to these violent prison gangs.
Yes.
And to have them be brutally victimized in prison.
Yep.
And to be put in a very high stress environment. And then their kids left at home are now growing up without a father. They're growing up in broken homes. So the whole prison industrial complex just accelerates and makes the cycle even worse. Now you have people who've gone in on a marijuana offense and they come back out, and now they've been introduced to this whole criminal culture that they would never have interacted with, and they're committing more crimes. They're starting to commit actual crimes, whereas they wouldn't have committed any crimes before. So the taxpayers are being made to pay to destroy these families on one hand, put more people on welfare because they can't support themselves.
Yep.
The kids end up in special ed because they need special treatment. They've got behavioral problems now. They don't have that father figure in their life. The kids are falling in with the wrong crowd, and it just perpetuates and accelerates the problem.
Yeah. So, I just, when I'm up to the State House, I say, how do we fix this? And nobody wants to listen or come up with an idea, because we have this industry built and they don't want to take it apart because, the unions come and, the commissioners all come. And
because I'll tell you what,
they all go, you can't take my job away.
I've worked union, and you'd be surprised, most union households are actually some of the most conservative people you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, you have to be there. You have to work union to understand what it feels like when the union officials keep saying, those Republicans are attacking your jobs. Now, when I've gone to, and I ask everyone I know to go to the Communist Party's website, cpusa.org, Because I told all my buddies at the Union Hall, I'm like, these guys are just a bunch of socialists and communists. And they're like, no, they're not communists. They're for us. And I'm like, no, they're a bunch of communist activists. That's why they come out of frickin' Harvard and Yale and whatnot. So they go to the Communist Party, open up the Communist Party paper, and it looks exactly like the Union paper. It's the same wording, it's the same talking points. And I've been sending more and more of my friends to the Communist Party's website, and it's all these left-wing talking points. And then people see the same talking points at Talking Points Memo, Huffington Post, Mother Jones, NAACP, Democrat Party, everything. And it's the exact same talking points. And the reason is they're pushing the exact same agenda. There was a guy who spoke at an event in the 2016 Republican primary, and he said back in the 1990s, something like 20,000 socialist and communist activists took over the AFL-CIO.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, because my union was affiliated with AFL-CIO, and as soon as it got taken over by, basically socialist activists, all of a sudden the union officials, instead of being rank and file, all of a sudden they're coming out of Harvard and Yale and Columbia University and all these left-wing schools pushing left-wing politics. The same things that these Marxist college professors are pushing in our colleges, the union officials are pushing on union members. And they always act like, oh, how dare they question whatever, gun control. How dare they question pro-abortion, or how dare they question the federal government control over healthcare? How dare they question some liberal policy or global warming or something? They're crazy, radical, ultra right-wing, whatever. And I'm like, well, most people question all that stuff. That's what we do as Americans, is we question and challenge policies. And I've had a lot of former Democrat reps over the years, former state reps, and they all kind of say the same thing. There's no dissent allowed on the left. There's no dissent allowed, and it's all very orderly, and it's all very rigid. And you got a few billionaire liberals at the top, Tom Steyer, Michael Bloomberg, George Soros, and all these guys, and they get together and they kind of organize, okay, here's this synthetic political philosophy, and they push it down on the college kids. And I go to the college kids, and I'm like, I just graduated from college. And I go to them, and I'm like, no, here's how it really is. And they're like, well, what about climate change? And I'll explain that there are 3 different views on climate change. And they're like, well, I've never heard that before. I thought it was just all deniers. And I said, no, there's a whole science behind it. There are people openly questioning everything.
Yeah, there is.
Or what about, how come you're not giving enough funding to whatever? And I start explaining, okay, colleges. UNH has a $23 million a year chancellery, and it's literally, UNH is, people don't realize this, UNH is one of the most powerful political lobbies in Concord. And in every state across the country, every state legislature, one of the most powerful political lobbies is the university system.
Oh.
That's why they're getting these huge subsidies. The college students don't get the benefit.
No.
Their college tuition and costs go up.
Yeah.
So it's, you're getting gouged as a student, then you come out, you've got 50, 60,000 in student loans from a public university, and then you're getting nailed as a taxpayer, and then Congress is running up these huge budget deficits, and the university systems around the country and the colleges, was it 99% of college professors who give money to campaigns, 99% goes to Democrats.
Oh yeah.
And then the Democrats reciprocate by borrowing even more money to give even more money to the college academic industrial complex.
Yeah. Well, I like these nonprofits, with huge salaries that give a lot to the
$500,000 a year salaries and whatnot, and they funnel all this money around tax-free. How do they get away with this?
Yeah. I've always questioned that, because that's been always a sore subject. These nonprofits that really shouldn't be nonprofits. In my eyes. But sadly we come to the end. But we got some more topics, and I'd love to have you on again, and we can talk more.
Absolutely.
All right, I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Max.
Good seeing you.
Yeah. And again, we had Max Abramson, and he was a former state rep over in Seabrook, and that's a good town over there. I like the nuclear plant over there. I don't know how you are on it. We've got to talk about that someday.
I like it.
Do you? Good. And until next time, we'll talk to you later. Bye now.